everybody, Ed here with the Digital Digest, and today I wanted to share my full review, the digitally digested segment for the Microsoft Surface Pro 4. Now you can see I've got the type cover 4th gen attached to the Surface Pro 4, which I think is an absolute must-have, whether you own the Surface Pro 3 or the Pro 4. That is a side note, but let's get right to the full review. So the Pro 4 starts at $899, that's for the Core M3 version, and goes all the way up to above $3,000, depending on your configuration. So it's all a matter of what you actually want to get out of your Surface Pro experience. You can see I'm going right to the Microsoft website right now. This will also give you a good idea of what the Backlit Keyboard looks like, since I am working in lower light conditions as opposed to the previous both unboxing and update that I've done on this product with traditional natural lighting. So I wanted all of you to see, much like in my review of the Surface Book, what the actual product operates like in less than ideal lighting situations. So you can see the backlight relatively strong, basically the same brightness as the previous generation, but now we've got more of an island style keyboard, a larger trackpad that is more sensitive and intuitive, and really just a better overall experience, much like the tablet itself. Now, is there a huge leap from Gen 3 to Gen 4? No. I will start off the review by saying that. But since the 3rd generation of the Surface Pro line was easily the most significant, the fact that they improved upon it in any shape or form, in my opinion, is impressive. So let's talk about those improvements. Now, I mentioned the starting price of $899, and you can see the new Surface devices being pushed heavily by Microsoft, and for good reason. They've spent a lot of money on basically bringing their name to the hardware world, somewhere where they exclusively have existed in the software realm since inception. So you can see we've got a lot of configurations here. The one I just mentioned, the Core M3, which is the lowest powered, and I really don't recommend that product for anyone. Students, not a single person. It's just, at $899, not something I would recommend to anyone. If you step up to the Core i5, there at least, even though you're not getting 8 gigs of RAM, which I'll try to help you determine whether or not you need through the course of this review, you are getting a processor that is far more capable. Remember, all of these are low voltage chips, the same ones found in the Surface Book. So if you're considering the Surface Book, you likely will also be considering the Surface Pro 4. It really comes down to form factor and whether or not you want the true laptop experience that is a hybrid, or this, which is really the hybrid that I think is more effective and at the end of the day really accomplishes the goal, which is to be the best of both worlds in a way that no other product out there right now does. The Surface Book, on the other hand, a completely different beast, even though it shares the same hardware. So for $1,000, that to me right there, the i5 4 gig model, is pretty much the mainstream norm for what every average user could likely use and will meet their needs. But if you're more of a power user, you're going to want to step up to the 8 gig version. Not only will you double your storage of the SSD, going from 128 up to 256, but more importantly, you now have 8 gigs of RAM, which means that any sort of software, whether we're talking about photo or video editing, AutoCAD for rendering, 3D models, you're going to be able to do that. And that's something that with the 4 gig model, you're going to really be pushing it. So even though the 8 and the 4 gig i5 have the same computational capability, of course the 4 gig model simply cannot do the amount of multitasking or meet the requirements of many pieces of software that the 8 gig model can. So that's very important for those of you that are trying to determine which one is right for you. So if you are going to run software that has a minimum requirement of 4 gigs of RAM, I would be looking at the 8 gig version, simply because you really don't want to start at the minimum requirement. The other models, of course, geared towards more power use. The i7s haven't even dropped yet. Get this video chat out of here, Microsoft. We don't need it. They basically just become incredibly expensive. Once you move to the 16 gig model, you're looking at $17.99, and then you can customize. Let me get this out of here. And if you customize, you're going to see that the configuration options, while abundant, which is a great thing, it's part of the maturation of the entire Surface Pro line, really amounts to just an incredibly expensive machine. I mean, look at what the 1 terabyte 16 gig model will run you, $2,700. This isn't Surface Book money, but this is certainly more than enough to buy an incredibly powerful desktop or a best-in-class laptop. So there's no question about it, whether you go with the Surface Pro 4 that I'm reviewing here or the Surface Book, you are paying a very steep premium for the design and engineering that Microsoft and overall thought that they've put into the Surface brand, and the fact that they are standing behind it firmly, which I think is incredibly important. Active updates nonstop, and that's something I want to talk about here. For those of you wondering which model I have here because you haven't seen my unboxing or my update, this is the i5 8 gig model with the 256 gig SSD. I do find that to be the sweet spot if you actually plan on replacing your laptop, which after all is the pitch from Microsoft to begin with. This is the tablet that can replace your laptop, and I completely agree with that claim. It was true of the Surface Pro 3, and the Surface Pro 4 only takes it up another notch. When it comes to the screen, 12.3 inches, the Surface Pro 3 was 12 inches, so we did get a small gain in real estate. Basically, they've kept the form factor exactly the same, but 8 into the bezel. So that 0.3 inches is just really giving us a little bit more screen real estate around the entire surface area of the screen, so less bezel to hold on to, but still enough to use this comfortably as a tablet. We've got the same great kickstand that the Surface Pro 3 introduced. We have a micro SD card slot on the back for storage expansion, a single USB port, and a display port out. For video out, it is capable of 4K video output for those of you that are wondering at 60 Hertz. Of course, you can also pick up the optional accessory dock or use the Surface Pro 3 dock for this. It is compatible also with the Surface Pro 3 type cover, so you don't have to buy a new type cover if you're just upgrading your Surface Pro 4, or if you simply want to save the money and don't feel that the difference between this type cover and the 3rd gen is worth it. Although I would recommend moving to the 4th gen, because after all, if you're trying to emulate a laptop-like experience, this type cover does it better than the 3rd gen, but the 3rd gen really was the best that Microsoft had ever made. It changed, in fact, the entire usability, much like the kickstand did, and the bump up in screen real estate and aspect ratio. Slightly higher resolution on this display, but more importantly is the color accuracy. That's where things have really, in my opinion, improved quite a bit, because one big critique from photographers out there with the Surface Pro 3 was that it was a great device, but when it came to actual color reproduction, it was not trustworthy. Now we've got 100% coverage of the sRGB spectrum, not Adobe RGB, like the canvas that I lean on every day from Vio, the Z canvas, which has 95% coverage, but still incredibly close. Overall performance here, pretty much flawless. You know, there were some bugs out of the box. I mentioned that in my update, whether it was speaker popping. I didn't have any real video driver crashes on a regular basis with the Intel integrated 520 chipset. Once in a blue moon that popped up, so that really wasn't something worth mentioning, even though a lot of users were experiencing it. All of those things have gone away with updates. So thankfully, they were not hardware-based, they were firmware-based, and Microsoft has addressed it. So if you're worried about the overall performance of the Surface line and whether or not Microsoft is going to stand behind it, I can tell you right now, they are. This is the 4th gen, it's the most mature, and in my opinion, really one of the best pieces of tech on the market, because I really can't point to another machine in the Ultrabook world that's this thin, this light, you know, under 2 pounds, a little over with the type cover, that can go anywhere and still basically be a zero compromise experience. It's got the right aspect ratio, a large enough display, now color accuracy, very good if not best in class cameras, both on the front and rear, 5 on the front, 8 megapixel on the back, that again, better than pretty much anything else in its class, better than almost any tablet really out there. And then the inking experience is something that has also improved. We have 1,024 levels of sensitivity now, as opposed to the 256 on the 3rd gen. Still an N-Trig pen, remember, and interface. Remember that Microsoft owns N-Trig now. They bought them rather than continuing to pay them licensing fees. The button at the top of the pen, I've mentioned before, has multiple functions, whether it's summoning OneNote, Cortana, or screen capturing. But the overall feel of the way the pen actually writes on screen, even though I'm not doing an inking demo here, I'm far from an artist, at least when it comes to drawing, is not comparable to I would say the 3rd gen, not in that this can outperform it, because the processing power with the 6th gen Intel Skylake chips, the low voltage processors that power this and the Surface Book, are not really in another league necessarily, even though Microsoft claims a 30% performance jump overall. But the actual tactile feel and the texture of writing on screen has changed that much. And I really do think that you can sense the different levels of pressure sensitivity, although many already have decided they can't tell the difference. And I think for people that aren't artists, the difference will be negligible. For those of you that are specifically out for an inking machine, it's going to be noticeable, to say the least. Also, you can get different replaceable tips now for the pen, so that takes inking to another level that the Surface line simply didn't support in the past. We now also have the ability to dock it magnetically here on the side, something that Microsoft really should have had from day one, but it took till the 4th gen to get this right, and I'm glad that they did. One thing to note that I've noticed on my own is that the pen can, if you carry it around like this, keep it in a bag, tend to rub or mash, grind on the build of the machine, and the machine is extraordinarily durable, much like the Surface Book, so the pen will actually end up taking damage. So keep that in mind. Even though this is convenient, you may not want to travel with it this way, believe it or not. Just a word of caution. When it comes to the charger type, we're working with the exact same charger from the 3rd gen. You know, Microsoft did it right. There was no reason to change that, and so they didn't. Connects very easily, has an LED to let you know that it's charging. Battery life on here, by the way, the screen is at 100% brightness right now. You're looking at, I would say, somewhere between 6 and 8 hours. Microsoft claims 9 with video playback, depending on what you're doing. But overall capability is just fantastic. As I mentioned, if you wanted to run AutoCAD on here, Microsoft recommends the i7 models, but you really just need the i5 with the 8 gigs of RAM. You're not going to have any issues, and everything just works flawlessly. I have no complaints about this machine. I did when it had firmware issues that seemed like 1st gen bugs, even though here we were in a 4th generation product. But again, those things have been resolved. So any major complaint I had pretty much is no longer an issue. Furthermore, when you're dealing with audio, the speaker quality, the front-facing speakers that are built right here into the bezel on the left and right side, they work great. Very loud, clear. Are they best-in-class speakers? I mean, Microsoft has claimed they're a whole nother generation, and they are definitely better than the 3rd gen. Is it that big of a jump? No, it's not quite the jump that I feel the screen has with its color accuracy, but here's a sample. Stunning from the display. This is taking a look at the Vio Z canvas that I'm recording this on right now, at least my audio. Doesn't have a full-size SD card slot. Also, things aren't getting blown out, which is impressive because, you know, when you crank up audio to 100% on most laptops, it does distort the audio. Hybrid, you need to have the Surface Pro, the new dock, which is essentially... And this isn't going to, in my opinion, change... So if you have a little bit of OCD, the audio quality rather isn't going to be a sound system for you, but in terms of what you are accustomed to getting out of your laptop, it's going to be right there with it. 4K resolution, I don't recommend reviewing things in simply because you don't have a 4K screen here. You have something over 2K, but under 3. So 1440p is the sweet spot. Things look great. This is a great review device for still images as well. No question about that. Really a lot to like here in terms of media consumption as well as work. So the Surface Pro 4, in my opinion, no matter what configuration, as long as you're not going with the M3, I don't recommend it, is really going to give you one of the best combinations of work and play in one of the smallest and best designed form factors that frankly exists in today's world. And that's why it commands a premium for the internals that it does. You know, when you look at what's inside here, the 6th gen Intel processor, the SSD, dual band Wi-Fi, the pen input, even though all of these things are great, and by the way, impeccable build quality and screen quality, as I already mentioned, great cameras, the Windows Hello feature to recognize and unlock the system based on your face or retina as well. All of those things are very impressive, if not amazing. But the price that this machine commands, if we look at competing brands, whether it's Dell, which is rolling out a Surface Pro 4 competitor now, some will consider it a Surface Book competitor, even though it's based around an M chipset. Those products just simply are much less expensive, but don't necessarily deliver on the build quality. They also don't have clean installations and the direct firmware updates that you're going to get from Microsoft, similarly to the way that you would lean on a Nexus product or Apple users an iPhone, where they know all of their support is coming directly from the manufacturer. So there is a comfort to be had there that you simply will not get with any other manufacturer in the PC world. Yes, you will still get all of those Windows updates, but when it comes to driver updates pertaining specifically to the product itself and any issues it might have, that's where other PC makers, Dell, HP, I could go up and down the list of names, they simply have too many products to focus on to be as honed, as detail-oriented as Microsoft is. And that's why all of the problems that I did initially experience with this, I'm glad are rectified. And I had confidence that Microsoft could, because I really didn't believe that all of the hardware right out of the box was going to have a problem. It was unrealistic to think that. The key travel on the new type cover is fantastic, definitely an improvement from the previous gen, but I'll reiterate, the previous gen was very, very good. Really, at the end of the day, this can, without hesitation, replace your laptop. I mean, the fact that you can run AutoCAD, the current version of AutoCAD, and do 3D modeling on something that looks like this is just amazing. I mean, I think that's pretty much a dream for many users. Again, that one USB 3.0 port, the display port for 4K video out, ventilation all around the unit, volume rocker, power button right there, and then, of course, on the pen mount side, nothing other than the headphone jack. Again, remember, be careful with that. And then the actual type cover, easily removable and also stays steady. You can choose to have it in either position. Another thing they noticed, when I say either position, it magnetically attaches, as you can see right there, to the screen, despite it being dark. Let me bring the screen back up. The kickstand, still, in my opinion, one of the best elements of this product. But another thing I noticed, they got rid of the Windows button. That's not what I noticed. Everyone noticed that. But one issue that existed was that with the type cover, the 3rd gen, it would actually make it very difficult to touch any of the icons down here along the bottom of the screen. Now, with the new type cover, that issue is rectified. So even though you have the type cover, can use the mouse, the trackpad is great. In fact, I happen to like the trackpad on here a little bit more than that on the Surface Book. Don't tell anybody, because everyone drools over the Surface Book trackpad, and I understand why. It is really nice, but this just seems to be, believe it or not, a little bit more sensitive, in my opinion. So just my experience with the machine. But that aside, we now can actually touch any of these icons without issue, something that in days past would be an issue with the type cover in the 3rd gen. So this is a nice element of the Surface Pro 4 and something that I do appreciate. It's just attention to detail that Microsoft is bringing to the table, and that's what basically every upgrade here is: listening to consumers, making a better keyboard, better touchpad, better display with more color accuracy, better cameras, better inking experience, not only the levels of sensitivity, but the pen being changed, redesigned in a sense. The old pen I have right here, just so you can see it side by side. Completely circular. It didn't have the rubberized tip for erasing because you can erase on screen. You could do that in the previous Gen 2, but when you worked with this pen, you felt like you were going to scratch the display. Now that we have a rubberized texture on the new pen, you don't run into that. Also, you can see there's even a physical size difference. We also now have pen tip replacements. Something that, again, just didn't exist with this generation. So there's really a lot to like about the Surface Pro 4. I think much like the Surface Book, its biggest problem is pricing for most consumers, especially the fact that they wish the type cover was included. And at this point in the life of the Surface line of products, I've even come to the conclusion that the type cover should be included at this point, or at least bundled and discounted in a way that Microsoft just hasn't been savvy about marketing and pushing. I say this because first, second, third gen, all a work in progress. Here in the fourth gen, even though things have been revamped, you can even get a fingerprint scanner for $160 as opposed to the $130 that this type cover retails for, which I don't see a use for since you do have the Hello feature, so really no need for fingerprint scanning. But if you do need that, if your enterprise system, your business requires it, so be it. You've got the option. It's still something where Microsoft has done so many things to make this machine capable of really replacing your laptop, and that's a claim that they've always made, but in order to do that, you needed the type cover. And as I mentioned, in that first, second, and even third gen, they had to keep shelling out a lot of money on trying to design something as simple as this felt textured finished keyboard. I wish the power cover was here. It's not. Maybe we'll see that come back to life in the fourth gen. Hopefully the Surface Book wasn't just their way of bringing a power cover to us. I hope not, since it is a keyboard with a battery in it. But now that we're in the fourth gen, I feel like their costs, Microsoft that is, the costs of designing and manufacturing the type covers has to have come down. It's just economy of scale issue. The margins have to be tremendous. So if there's anywhere that they could really potentially give us all a break, it would be in the type cover. The Surface, on the other hand, even though this isn't an extreme makeover from the third gen, it's still more of a significant makeover than the type cover in that there are internals here that simply don't exist in the type cover. I mean, all we have are keys, backlit, and a larger touchpad. In terms of actual cost, it's all about design. Here, it's about design and what they have to pay to every other partner that is making parts for them, whether we're talking about Intel, the SSD, whatever it may be, the memory, all of those things are fixed costs that really they're negotiated, but they don't change in the way that a proprietary type cover like this does. So at this point, I think Microsoft should be including the type cover, or again, at least being far more aggressive at bundling it and discounting it in a way that makes consumers instantly purchase it rather than complain about it, which has frankly been the way that the Surface Pro line has been received almost every generation. So I used to think that it was ridiculous that consumers demanded it be included. Now here in the fourth gen, I think Microsoft has made enough money and lowered their own internal costs without me having any inside info, clearly. It's just common sense that they could actually move towards discounting it heavily, at least, if not bundling it with the right incentives, which they really don't do a great job of doing right now. But overall performance is just great on this machine. It doesn't get overly hot, doesn't get overly loud. This, again, a result of firmware fixes, because initially there were some issues where I would put the machine to sleep and it wouldn't go to sleep. I would hear the fans running. It would be making noise. I know you can't see anything right now. That problem is gone. It's back to working the way that it should, exactly like a laptop. So these are very important, finite details that, of course, seem small, and I don't want to say on the surface, but I just did. But they're huge, because when you're spending this kind of money, realistically $1,000 and up for something that is, at the end of the day, a tablet that's as powerful as any Ultrabook or more powerful than many, it should work like every other Ultrabook, even if you're paying for that premium because it's in the form of a tablet. Again, built like a rock, great battery life and performance to match, a better type cover, a better inking experience. Really, the Surface Pro 4 is, in my opinion, one of the best pieces of tech of 2015 and will also be into 2016 until Microsoft comes out with the Surface Pro 5. My wish list for what they could do to improve or change this really comes down to making the screen bigger. Give us another option, even if it's 13.5 like the Surface Book, or go bigger, 14 inches. Give us a type cover to match. They were smart to make accessories backwards compatible, so you can use the Pro 3 type cover here, the Pro 3 accessories. You don't have to take on all of the new ones. So if you do own the previous gen, you didn't need to go back into your wallet in order to pay for all of the new niceties of the 4th gen. Really, it's more about the guts of the experience than necessarily the type cover. But I know some of you will try this, like myself, and say, I have to have it because it really does complete the experience as intended. And that's exactly what the Type Cover 4 does. This is also a review of that. I won't be doing a separate review of the Type Cover 4 because it just isn't necessary. It's great. The Type Cover 3 was the best they ever made, and the Type Cover 4 takes it up yet another level. In total here, yes, you're paying a steep premium for this low voltage chip. Another thing I would love to see is possibly a Surface Pro down the line that isn't low voltage. I would be willing to accept a bigger device with more weight, granted that we could still maintain battery life with a laptop class chip rather than a low voltage chip. Now, that's not a knock against the 6th gen Skylake ULV processors in here. Those low voltage processors really do handle just about everything, which is why they are so popular. You really aren't going to have a problem doing anything. I mentioned 3D modeling on here, not an issue. But when you get into the amount of money being shelled out, the fact that you can actually go up to $2,700 for the 16 gig 1 terabyte i7 model, it's absolutely insane. And I'll explain to you why right now, quite simply. For those of you that think more means more, it doesn't. These low voltage processors, even though you're paying for a higher clock speed, they have limitations, and those limitations can be reached relatively quickly. As I mentioned before, if you're trying to figure out whether or not you need 4, 8, or 16 gigs of RAM, quite frankly, I wouldn't see any utility in having 16 gigs of RAM for a low voltage processor. So that rules out all of the 16 gig models for me personally, and I really couldn't see myself recommending them to any of you. I know many of you will buy it because you love the fact that you have a machine that you think is incredibly powerful. But again, a ULV chip, I just don't see being to the task of requiring 16 gigs of RAM. It just seems like overkill, an overkill complement to a processor that if it was a quad-core i7, then I would say, you know what, 16 gigs makes sense, kind of like in the Vio Z Canvas that I lean on as my daily driver. The Surface Pro 4, on the other hand, I don't see the logic in shelling out that sort of money still to have the brain of your machine be a low voltage 15-watt chip. And I'm all for power saving and battery life. Don't misunderstand me for a moment. It's just you have to be realistic about what you're accomplishing in doing that. And to me, that is why the 8 gig model or the 4 gig model, depending on what you actually need to do with your machine. Again, if you're running software that has a minimum requirement of 4 gigs of RAM, go with the 8. Do not try to see if you can make it with the minimum requirement. Your experience is going to be not awful, but you're not going to enjoy it as much. It's that simple. And for the price difference, especially if you do have the EDU discount or with Black Friday deals rolling around now this week, you have a very good chance of getting the 8 gig for just a little bit more, and it's going to also be a large step or measure in future-proofing. Don't be shocked if next gen the base configuration starts at 8 gigs. Not that they're going to push this to 32, because again, I've already stated I think that the 16 gig complements are absurd, and the same applies to the Surface Book. If these products, the Surface line, as much as I love them, if they had legitimate non-low voltage processors, I could make a different argument for the RAM. And that's not to say the RAM is a waste. It's still completely valuable to what you're running. After all, I keep mentioning AutoCAD, 3D modeling. It's going to run on this machine. It's not a question. It's a fact. You do not need the i7 model, even though Microsoft will tell you that. A little bit of lying by omission there. They say the Surface Book, however, i5 model with 8 gigs of RAM can run AutoCAD. That was my first giveaway. Same exact chip. And even if you claim different clock speed, newsflash, I already stated it, it works. I've used it. It is a non-issue. So if you're a student that doesn't have to run incredibly intensive software, then the 4 gig i5 model should suit your needs and take care of everything. However, if you are doing video editing, photo editing, anything that generally would put a ULV chip like the Skylake 6th Gen Intel processors that are inside these machines all the way up to their basically testing their chops to the max, you need RAM to balance that out and to match exactly what your software requires. And that's where the 8 gig model, in my opinion, again, is the sweet spot. 16 overkill. As far as SSD capacity, I can't call that overkill because if you need 1 terabyte, you need 1 terabyte. It's not the same as throwing 16 gigs onto an engine, a CPU in this case. I was just likening it to an engine that it really isn't going to make proper use of it. And this is a discussion I had with a close friend of mine. As soon as these products were announced a long time ago now, it seems, even though it's not that long ago, several months, was that I thought it was great that they had all these configuration options, but the reality is, what were you going to do with 16 gigs of RAM and a low voltage processor? So this is definitely more about marketing and making money, which is always going to be part of any business. In this case, the Surface Pro 4 right there, trying to do exactly that, and it makes sense. But in terms of what you actually need, that is an entirely different story altogether. So realistically, you've heard my thoughts. I think the i5 with 4 or 8 gigs of RAM is really the way to go. If you need a larger SSD, you can configure it. But remember, you do have a micro SD card slot on the back there. Flash storage of that capacity, not going to run anywhere near the speed of the SSD inside this machine, but incredibly inexpensive. And if you're just looking for mass storage, very easy to add 128, and incredibly expensive, by the way, for 64 gig cards these days. That's another deal that you'll see constantly throughout this holiday season. So the Surface Pro 4, fantastic piece of hardware. It is my pick for really the best overall tablet hybrid that can replace a laptop, as Microsoft has always marketed it. Even though I do love the Vio Z that I'm working with, that is not a machine for everyone. The Surface Pro 4 truly is a machine that anyone could pick up and use, and with all the different configuration options, even the M3 that I've personally written off and wouldn't recommend to anyone, because it's just too close in price. $100 difference gets you a real processor as opposed to what may as well be an Atom in some senses because of how low voltage it is. Even though it's also slightly lighter and it's fanless, by the way, for those of you that are curious. I still think that the beauty of the Surface Pro 4 is that it can accommodate any user, unless, of course, you need a quad-core, more desktop replacement class type machine. That's where you're going to realize that, you know, what I've been talking about, the 16 gigs of RAM, those overkill configurations don't make that much sense. And you probably should be looking at an XPS laptop. Dell's new XPS machines are beautiful, have amazing displays. I'm not a very big Dell fan for a variety of reasons I'm not going to get into here. I would much rather put any of you, including myself, of course, in a Surface product simply because of Microsoft's reputation, their build quality, and the fact that they really do stand behind it now that they have a brick-and-mortar store physical presence here in the U.S. that didn't exist 6 months ago, a year ago, as it does today. In my local area, there are probably a half a dozen stores now, whereas a few years back, there was one, I believe, maybe not even. So Microsoft has invested a lot in not only demonstrating that Windows 10 is a great OS, and by the way, it is. If you haven't upgraded and you're on an older machine, do it already. What are you waiting for until they charge you for their best experience? Because trust me, it is the best OS on the market. And then to boot, you're getting amazing hardware here in the Surface Pro 4 line that really has been enhanced and upgraded in every possible way. So do I love this machine? Yeah, I can say that. The Surface Pro 4 is amazing. I'm not the only person in my family that owns one and enjoys one. And there really still is nothing else like it. Even if I compare it to the Vaio Z Canvas, which I could, if it's something you all really wanted to see, they're such different machines, not just in terms of the processor, but also the way they work. That here we have a keyboard that's attached that can actually be used on a lap, so can the Surface Book. But the Vaio Z Canvas, not really a lappable machine. You need a flat surface, a desk, whatever it may be, to work on it as you would with any other laptop that, again, wouldn't be something that you could use on your lap. So it really wouldn't be a laptop, would it? Kind of defeats the name. The Surface Pro 4 accomplishes that. It can be a tablet on its own and still be incredibly powerful. How often do I find myself not using the type cover? I would say, it really depends on what I'm doing with the machine. If I'm doing work, the type cover is attached to it. If I'm just browsing the web, I don't need this. There's no reason. The on-screen keyboard is perfectly fine. There's nothing wrong with this at all. So it's really a matter of personal preference, personal use, and what you think you're going to be doing with the machine. But everything has been improved, and pricing pretty much has stayed the same. So those are things that are definitely good. Again, remember, you're just paying that incredibly high premium for the Microsoft design, presence now, as I mentioned, physical presence in terms of stores, and of course the fact that they're going to continue to support this device through its lifespan. And who knows, 5th gen accessories may actually be compatible with this as well, which would be another big push for those of you that have bought into the 4th or even the 3rd gen. I mean, I doubt that'll be the case because they'll likely refresh it and make it bigger, as I've been hoping for. And again, I really do wish there was a 13.5-inch. I kind of wish the Surface Book wasn't what they launched and they stuck to Surface-type products, tablets replacing computers, but in a bigger form with a bigger type cover that really would have just satisfied users like myself that were looking for a larger experience, but again, unmatched in terms of its weight class, fan noise, heat dissipation, all of those things that Microsoft has pretty much become the master of at this point. Granted, my Vaio Z is actually more silent, believe it or not, than the Surface in many instances, and it has 3 legitimate fans running, but they do dampen and sort of mute each other out. That's part of the engineering design of the Canvas, but not trying to stray. So the Surface Pro 4, in my opinion, worth every penny despite its premium, unlike the Surface Book, where I do have some reservations about telling people it's worth it because you're really paying a lot more, even though you are getting a keyboard, for not much more battery life and really just a larger display. Otherwise, identical performance unless you get the dedicated GPU, which, by the way, I didn't discuss gaming, and I'll wrap it up there. When it comes to gaming, this is going to give you basically half the performance that the dedicated GPU will give you in the Surface Book. Now, if you go with an i7 model, the gaming is going to step up a little bit because you'll get the Iris graphics from Intel as opposed to the 520 chipset that you'll find here, or the 515 in the M3, and that will be the Iris will get pretty close, I would say, to probably what the Surface Book with dedicated NVIDIA GPU can do. I know that because the Iris chipset in my Vaio Z Canvas gets pretty close to what the NVIDIA dedicated GPU can do. So the i7 model, its biggest advantage is really going to be in gaming, and that's still going to be nominal at best. When it comes to playing games, you can game on here. You can play current titles. Just be ready to play in the lowest settings and at very low resolutions. You will not be able to run at native res, let alone 1080p, let alone even 720p in some instances. So can it game? Absolutely. Is it a gaming machine? Absolutely not. So really, the Surface Pro 4, that's why I do consider it the best of everything, because it can do just about everything as long as you respect the limitations of that low voltage processor and understand that this is not a gaming laptop. This is not a desktop replacement, even though it can be for the majority of the population out there, including some power users now that we've got a machine like this that, again, I'm still amazed that something in this profile can handle without any throttling, like the 3rd gen line, something like AutoCAD and 3D modeling. So a lot to like here. Also expensive, but not nearly as expensive as the Surface Book. Any questions or comments, please feel free to post them. And of course, as usual, please feel free to subscribe. Later.